So the first thing that you'll see is that PMA2 and Node 2 are now on the forward end of the lab. This time Dan Tanney will egress with Peggy Whitson. Dan will translate to the zenith side of S0, where he will interface with the vent tool extension bag that was configured there for him by Yuri on the previous EVA. He will set up the vent tools and then translate to the nadir side of S0, where Peggy will be waiting and receive the vent tools. She will be interfacing with the shunt jumper, which is simply a ammonia jumper, which you'll see a video or a still picture here in a second. This jumper simply completes the cooling loop on the loop A side and allows ammonia to flow through. By removing this jumper, it gives us the capability to mate up the fluid tray and now have Node 2 along in the same loop with the S0. Once that jumper is removed, Peggy will vent the ammonia that is trapped inside. Dan will translate then to the aft end cone of Node 2, where he will remove 2 ammonia caps in preparation for the mating of the fluid lines later on in the EVA. He will then translate to the zenith surface of P1. At this location, he will interface with 2 electrical harnesses, which are known as the SFU, or the Squib Firing Unit interfaces. These were previously configured on Flight 10A during the dock time frame in order to allow for the release of the launch locks, launch restraints of the aft P1 radiators. And we're simply swapping those connectors back to the previous configuration. Once Dan is complete with that task, he will translate back over to S0. At this location, he will meet up with Peggy for the relocation of the Loop A fluid tray. The fluid trays have a mass of around 300 pounds and are about 18.5 feet long. The method that will be used for this relocation is simply one crew member will translate to the receiving location, restrain themselves via their BRT or body restraint tether, and then they will maintain control of the fluid tray. The next crew member will move down to the next spot, and they'll simply hand off the tray back and forth until they finally reach the installation location. This tray for the Loop A will be installed on the on top of the starboard avionics tray. It will be bolted down via 2 bolts, and then the upper part will be deployed to allow for mating to the fluid lines. This is some NBL video showing the crew mass handling the tray for relocation. The rigid tether is on the crew member in the foreground, and he is rigidly attached there. This is the the deployment of the upper part of the fluid tray. There's a handrail down at the hinge location that the crew member is using to deploy that. So this is the entire fluid tray. Peggy will be at the S0 work site. Dan will be at the Node 2 work site. There are a total of 6 fluid lines that need to be mated up, 2 at S0, 2 at the hinge, and 2 at Node 2. And at this point, we would then be able to have the supply and return lines fully mated up between Node 2 and S0. So all we have at this point is fluid lines. We also need the avionics lines. However, they are on the opposite side that match up with the Loop A lines. So Dan will translate over to the other side and mate up 11 avionics lines in order to provide the proper avionics to Node 2. Once Peggy's complete with her fluid lines, she will translate to the forward end cone of Node 2. At that location, she will mate up 4 electrical harnesses. These are the PMA2 now to Node 2 umbilicals, previously the PMA2 to lab umbilicals, and these are the primary umbilicals. Once that's complete, that is the end of the EVA 11. This is now EVA 12, which again is very similar to the previous EVA. Dan Tanney and Peggy Whitson will also be performing this EVA. Dan will come out, and the first thing that he'll do is relocate the vent tool extension bag for use on now the station port side. He will, after he's done with that, he will transfer again the vent tools to Peggy Whitson, which will be working with the port side shunt jumper. Dan will then translate to the aft end cone of node 2, remove 2 of the fluid caps, again in preparation for meeting of the fluid tray, and then he will relocate an APFR that he will use during the installation of the fluid tray, now on the port side. At this point, we pick up with the relocation of now the Loop B fluid tray, which will end up on the station port side. This fluid tray is currently located on face 3, which is just on the aft side of S0. Because of this, it will require a few more manipulations of the fluid tray during the relocation. However, once the crew gets it to the front side of the S0 truss structure, the rest of the relocation is very similar to the one on the previous EVA. Again, this fluid tray has a mass, again, of around 300 pounds and is around 18.5 feet long. So again, both crew members will be using the same technique of using their rigid tether to restrain themselves while they perform the mass handling of the fluid tray. And they'll continue the handoff until they do the final installation on the port side right on top of the avionics tray. Again, it will be secured via 2 bolts, and then the crew will perform the deploy of the upper section. They will then take their respective locations, Peggy at the S0 worksite and Dan at the Node 2 worksite. And once again, there will be a total of 6 fluid lines that will need to be mated and opened up, 2 at S0, 2 at the hinge, and 2 at Node 2. And at this point, we would be able to have ammonia flowing between S0 and Node 2 on the Loop B side. Once again, we have the avionics connectors that need to be mated, and once again, they're on the opposite side of the fluid tray. So Dan will now translate over to the station starboard side, and he will be mating up a total of 5 avionics connections on this side. Once Peggy is complete with her fluid tray connections, she will be coming over to the starboard CBM pedals, and she will release the launch locks on those pedals to allow for deployment. This is in preparation for receiving the Columbus module at this location on Flight 1E. She will then complete the PMA2 to Node 2 umbilicals, the remaining 4, which are the redundant umbilicals. Depending on time, the main get-ahead for this EVA is the deployment and mating of the Spitz umbilicals. These were previously just routed between the lab and PMA2. Now that Node 2 is in between those, the bags holding the harnesses have to be relocated, and then the harnesses need to be unwound from inside the bag in order to make the additional length. The harnesses will be routed as you see there. At this point, the crew will ingress, and that will be the completion of the third EVA, which I guess is now EVA number 12.